This is slide 4 of our progressivism unit. The first of 2 slides here on TR, Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is one of my favorite human beings ever. He is my favorite president ever, and certainly, in my opinion, top 5, maybe even top 3, probably top 3, in terms of greatest presidents that I think we've ever had. So we're going to spend a couple of slides here just sort of talking, well, one slide talking about Roosevelt's background, getting to the presidency. And then our next slide will cover some of the things he does as a progressive president. Roosevelt is the first of our great progressive presidents. He will do more to help common average people, to give power to people rather than businesses, than any president had before him. Okay? So let's kind of look at Roosevelt's background, getting to the point of being president. Right? First of all, Roosevelt had a very rough childhood. He suffered greatly with asthma before anybody really knew what to do about asthma. Now, he comes from a lot of money, very wealthy family, and he grows up privileged. But the great frustration is that none of their money can do anything about his health. As a young child, he was very sickly, wasn't allowed to go outside and do anything, and eventually he just decides, and his father in particular decides, this is no way to live, that if this is living, he'd rather not live. So if it means he dies, but he's going to go start living life. And he gets outside and he starts doing things, and lo and behold, for him, that is the saving grace. It's what saves him. Had he stayed inside, indoors all the time, he probably would have died, but he never got to experience sort of the outdoors as a young child, but then as he grew up into teenage years and so forth, decided that's what he was going to do. So he did. And it really kind of changes his life, sets a tone for the rest of his life. Right? He would go on to college at Harvard, where he would graduate with honors. And it's really sort of in college where he starts to get into politics. Joins political clubs and so forth. He will he will become quite the athlete in college. He wins a college campus boxing championship, bare knuckle boxing. Up at the top here, this is the top right. This is a picture of Roosevelt from his college days at Harvard. He'll win a boxing championship. He was a rower. He was involved in all sorts of sports and really kind of grows into himself in college. Okay? He will sort of the first big job he has in 1881. He will get elected as a state legislator for New York. Families in New York. He grows up in New York and gets himself elected as a state representative for New York City. Heads to Albany, the capital, to work there. Okay? It is while he is a state legislator in politics, in 1884, that Roosevelt experiences the greatest tragedy of his life. February 14, 1884, and on Valentine's Day of all days. His 2 days prior, okay, his wife had given birth. On February 12th, his wife had given birth to their first child, a daughter. He, his first-time father. He has a daughter of his own. He's flying high, the highest of highs here. And just 2 days later, on February 14, 1884, his wife and his mother die in the same house on the same day within hours of each other. He is crushed, obviously. His wife dies of complications from childbirth, his mother from tuberculosis, complications of tuberculosis. But the two most important women in his life die within hours of each other on the same day in the same house, just different floors. That's it. And he is left to sort of pick up the pieces after this. Okay. He's now realized a brand new father, and during that time, men didn't raise children. He didn't know anything about raising a child, and he's got a 2-day-old. So he leaves his daughter with his sister, the child's aunt, to take care of, and he has to get away. He says, I can't stay in this place anymore. He writes in his diary, the light has gone out of my life. And he's got to get out. So he leaves his daughter with his sister, and he heads west. Growing up, he always, since he couldn't get out in nature, he read books about it. He always liked books about cowboys and the Wild West. So he's determined he's going to go experience it for himself. So he buys himself a ranch, some land in the Dakota Territory, and he heads west. Okay? And that's this picture up here. Okay? He will. He's going to be a cowboy. Right? Now he shows up looking just like that, in the beaver pelt hat, the buckskins, the moccasins, and all that. And all the cowboys out west just die laughing. It's hilarious because he thinks this is what cowboys wear, and he shows up looking like this, and he talked in a real high, squeaky voice, and everybody thought, "Oh my God, here comes this crazy rich Easterner. He's going to come out here and make an idiot of himself." But he doesn't. Roosevelt is determined to earn the respect of the ranchers and the cowboys out west, and he does everything they do. He builds fences around the ranch. He shoes the horses. He brands the cattle. He does everything the other ranchers do and the other cowboys do. And very quickly, they figure out, well, this isn't like just any other rich Easterner here coming out west. This guy actually can be one of us. And he is. And he will spend several years. He goes back and forth to visit his daughter. But he'll live out west in the Dakota Territory for a couple of years. He will, he says this is where he finds himself. He learns what it is to be a man in the West. He says he never could have become president had it not been for his time in the West. So this is a very significant time in his life. Now, near the end of 1895, okay, he will come back to New York, and he will get himself appointed police commissioner of New York City. And he says, I'm going to clean up this place. He's going to clean up New York City. He's going to take on the political machines, and he's going to wipe out corruption in New York City government, especially in the New York City Police Department. And he does. He cleans house. He gets rid of everybody that was crooked. He makes a really good name for himself as a reformer, as a progressive reformer. Okay? Thanks to some family connections, in 1897, he will get himself appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Even though he'd never, been in the Navy before, he'd never sailed a boat before, other than a sailboat. He studies, he reads, he makes a name for himself here, and gets himself appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And we'll talk about this more in our next unit. But we'll almost single-handedly kind of start the Spanish-American War. Now, once the war starts, Roosevelt refuses to be tied to a desk, so he resigns his commission as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and will start his own cavalry unit known as the Rough Riders. Here you see a picture of Roosevelt in his cavalry days. Now, here's a pet peeve of mine. Notice I said cavalry, not Calvary. Okay? You hear all the time, here comes the cavalry. No, the cavalry's not coming anywhere. Calvary is where Christ was crucified. The cavalry comes to the rescue. So Roosevelt will found his own cavalry unit called the Rough Riders. He gets and again, doesn't know much about this. He certainly never commanded a military unit. So he says, I'll put this unit together. It'll be a volunteer regiment. I'll pay for everything. I'll pay for the horses, the uniforms, the food, the training, everything they need. And then he gets a friend of his, Colonel Leonard Wood, W-O-O-D, to actually command the Rough Riders. Now, Roosevelt gets himself named a lieutenant colonel in there, but he hands over command to Wood, and then he joins up. Okay, and he had learned about horses and how to ride and control horse from his time in the West. Okay, and again, we'll talk more about the Rough Riders as we get into our next unit here. But the Rough Riders will experience their greatest victory in the Spanish-American War on the island of Cuba at San Juan Hill. Okay? The victory at San Juan Hill will be the high point for the Rough Riders. Okay? Now, he comes back from the war a hero here and will use his fame from the Spanish-American War to get himself elected governor of New York in 1898. Up at the top here, you see the campaign button for Governor Theodore Roosevelt with him in his Rough Rider hat there, his cavalry hat, calling on his heroics in the war and all of that. He gets himself elected governor, and the politicians, the businessmen in New York hate it, because the same progressive reforming spirit he had as police commissioner in New York City, he takes to Albany as governor of New York. And he's going to clean up the corruption in politics and business in New York. So the New York businessmen think, we got to get rid of him. We can't have him around here. He's destroying our business. He's ruining us. So they convince the Republican Party to put him on the ticket for vice president in 1900, and he will get elected. William McKinley will be elected president in 1900, and New York businessmen breathe a huge sigh of relief. Whew, thank God, that damned cowboy, they called him, is gone. But if they think they had problems with him as vice president, wait till they see him as president, because McKinley will die in 1901. He'll get shot, and Vice President Roosevelt becomes President Roosevelt. There you see the campaign button. He'll at the bottom of the page here. He'll serve out his term of McKinley's first term, but then in 1904 will run again in his own right. There you see Theodore Roosevelt for president, 1904, hearkening back to his days as a hero at San Juan Hill. Okay? So that gets us up to the point where he is president, and then in our next slide we'll talk about what he does as a progressive reformer.